Morning, everybody. We are in a place this morning, hopefully, to ready ourselves to again go on a vacation. I think every Sunday morning is that opportunity to find a deeper and wider space within our consciousness so that we can get a better perspective of ourselves and what's going on in our lives. And in order to do this expanded view, this calm seeing, we use the great wisdom traditions. And today we're going to be going into something I think that is very important and very practical. And that is how this view relates to the way we interact in our relationships. One of the qualities that begins to really emerge as we awaken is this deep sense of compassion and loving kindness. And as we're navigating this terrain of coming into a higher consciousness, we have to let go of many of these former ways of thinking and relating that can be very sticky and very troublesome and cause us internal and external conflict. Because what we're going to really distinguish today is the relative truth and the absolute truth. These are very important distinctions that arise within all of the wisdom traditions. In Buddhism, they're called the two great truths, or the two truths. The relative truth is how you are seeing things from the level of the body. Everything is relative. Everything is within a realm of objects and form. The absolute truth is where we see things from our higher consciousness, or Buddha nature, or Christ mind. And the goal here is that we have to awaken to who we really are. We've never ceased being Buddha nature or Christ mind. But when we have completely forgotten that identity or that truth about ourselves, we become completely hypnotized and embedded within the relative reality. And that causes suffering, because the relative reality, without knowing the higher reality, doesn't have the substance and the peace and the love and the joy that can be infused into it from the absolute realm or the higher mind. So when we forget the higher and stay within the relative, our relationships are superficial and they don't fulfill us. Our sense of self is superficial and it doesn't fulfill us. So this is the thing that Buddha talked about when he says all of life. He was talking about relative life. All of life is unsatisfactory. It doesn't give us the ability to feel joy, peace, calm, and happiness. And so we want to recognize this very important distinction of how to tease apart our codependency, our so-called love that we have in our relationships, which is oftentimes fueled by and maintained by guilt and obligation, and how compassion, true compassion, has to be the antidote to that way of relating to the relative level. Right? Very important distinctions to go through this morning. Before we get into it, let's just calm the mind and open the heart. And as you're breathing deeply and slowly, do a body scan and just see if you're holding on to any tension, if there's any restriction in the body. If you find those areas that are tight or tense, just bring your awareness to that area. Breathe in, maybe breathe out through your mouth, and relax. So for the next hour, we are going to open a part of our mind to a way of thinking and being that is beyond what we are conditioned to think and be as the ego in the world. So in order to access this higher part of our consciousness, we need to relax. We need to let go of what we think and just allow the sense of being with an open mind and an open heart and totally free of past, present, and future to be the foundation of this moment. And we're ready to learn something new today. This is the readiness that brings in the higher teaching, this teaching of liberation and freedom from suffering. We don't know what it's going to be, but we are open and ready. So I think I want to begin with a familiar quote for many of us, this prerequisite, if you will, of following the Master's teaching as he gives it in Matthew's Gospel. And scholars refer to this as one of the hard sayings of Jesus. Like, when a hard saying, what it means is it confronts us with some kind of a choice. And it doesn't appear to be an easy choice, which makes it a hard saying. But I think as we go along this morning and we tease out what's really going on underneath of what Jesus is saying, you'll find it actually brings relief and release rather than a sense of burden and difficulty. So he says, Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his own cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. What's important, I think, to really suss out here is the me. When Jesus is saying me, what is he referring to? As we're going to point this out over and over again in our conversation this morning, he's not another ego talking to egos. The me is the absolute truth, right? The absolute truth is where the relative truth has to come to terms with in its life. Because as he says, if you're hanging on to this relative life of being in the body, you're going to lose this life. This life is ephemeral, and it really is a will-o-wisp. Here today, gone tomorrow, and everything that we're setting our attention on is just as ephemeral. And if we really do some deep insight practice, it's not what we conceive it to be. Our concepts about everything, including ourselves, totally distorted. That's why one of the primary practices in these contemplative sciences is once you calm your mind down, then you cultivate what they call in Buddhism vipassana, insight, deep looking into. And when you begin to say, okay, so what is my relationship with myself? What is myself? What is my relationship with my son? Who is my son? And you really begin to tease apart everything that you think about your life, your relationships. You begin to realize that it's made up of all of these preconceived beliefs that are really not valid beliefs when they are looked at. So for instance, we call that a chair, and we think that it exists all on its own as a chair. But when you look at it, it's made up of these fibers and metals and colors and dyes. And so where is the chair if you really were to break it down in all of the constituent parts? Where is your son if you were to break it down in all of the constituent parts? What we get at is what we saw last week. Everything actually is empty of individual existence. We assume it to be existing on its own, but that's part of the distortion of the lower life or the lower space. And this is why we're bewildered, confused, lonely, and suffering. Because we associate ultimate value with my son, my daughter, myself, my wife, my husband, my chair. We associate that these things are real, solid, dependable, and they will be there tomorrow and the day after. And we put our life on these things. We put all of our hope into these things and people. And inevitably, they will disappoint or fade away or die or break. Everything at this level of life is dissatisfactory because it's relative, and it can never fulfill what we are looking for in it. So he says, if you lose your life for my sake, me being the ultimate truth, then you'll find life. You'll find your abundance. You'll find your happiness. You'll find your joy. But you first must go through this purifying or purging or letting go process of all that you think you think. You have to empty out of your concepts. Now, again, we will find this to be a natural response when we begin to look deeply at what we believe. The trouble is, most of us don't have the interest or take the time or are willing to really look at what we believe. So we assume what we believe is true and valid, and we begin to doubt anything that would contradict that, like these teachings. So in that regard, we put more worth in what we think rather than in the ultimate reality, right? Whoever loves your daughter, your husband, yourself more than me is not worthy of me. It's only not that he's, wagging a finger. It's that you're putting the value on what you want it to be, and it's going to disappoint. It's going to leave you. It's going to upset you. It's going to hurt you. Everything within the relative reality will never fulfill. And so he comes to bring a sword. This is really an important aspect of this too, because when you begin to want to wake up, when you want to end your suffering, you begin to feel like you're suffocating, you're stifled, you're caught in these relationship dynamics that are very dysfunctional, and they are in many ways causing this sense of deep-seated unrest and trouble in your heart. And we oftentimes just you bite the bullet and stay in these familiar dynamics, because we don't know any other way to be, and we think it's loving to suffer along with these dysfunctional dynamics. And it's only because we don't know another way to be that is hurting us. Because as soon as we begin to open to this me that he's coming from, we begin to have a different perspective in relationship to our interpersonal dynamics. Now, what's also fascinating about this notion of compassion is we always think of Jesus as so loving, so gentle, right? Gentle Jesus. He's so compassionate, just heals and forgives everyone. But listen to that hard saying. We're going to get the same thing from Buddhism. You have this teaching, which is the very foundation of the teachings on compassion in Buddhism, the way of the Bodhisattva. And in this book, Shantideva is the expression of universal compassion. And so there's a distinction here that we need to make between staying rooted within these very toxic relationship dynamics and compassion. There is a marked difference. It's not compassion to stay in dysfunctional dynamics, enable bad behavior, stay within these patterns that keep us feeling like we're never going to be able to see beyond the toxicity, the troubles within these certain relationships. So that's not compassion. So we want to make sure we get these ideas very clear. So just for instance, Shantideva, just so we don't think this is like a hard-hearted approach that we're going to get into, Shantideva says this: for all those ailing in the world, until their every sickness has been healed, may I myself become for them the doctor, nurse, the medicine itself. Right? This is his desire. And what he's basically saying is, there's a part of the mind when it starts to wake up. In Buddhism, it's called bodhicitta. In A Course in Miracles, in Christianity, it's called the Holy Spirit. It's that part of the mind that wakes up and realizes everyone is suffering. Everyone is lonely. Everyone is lost because they forgot the absolute truth. And they're trying to find it only within the relative and superficial. So I want to be a bridge. I want to be a light. I want to extend this love and healing for others. So that's the yearning that you're hearing from Shantideva. He doesn't want anyone to suffer. He doesn't want anyone to be lost. And then he says, and so let beings do to me whatever does not bring them injury. Whenever they may think of me, let this not fail to bring them benefit. May I be a guard for those who are protectorless, a guide for those who journey on the road. For those who wish to cross the water, may I be a boat, a raft, a bridge. May I be an isle for those who yearn for land, a lamp for those who long for light. For all who need a resting place, a bed. For those who need a servant, may I be their slave. May I be the wishing jewel, the vase of wealth, a word of power and the supreme healing. May I be the tree of miracles. Thus, for everything that lives, as far as the limits of the sky, may I be constantly their source of livelihood until they pass beyond sorrow. Right? That's the illuminated compassion. Okay? So just so we're clear, that's his foundation that he's coming from. Illuminated compassion. Now listen to what he says about relationships. Because of loved ones and desire for gain, We fail to turn away from worldly things. These then are the first things to let go of. The ones with common sense should conduct themselves like this. Not seeing, if I crave for other beings, a veil is cast upon this perfect truth, right? Where he's coming from, seeing love as the one reality, the one self, and this illumined compassion. If I begin to crave for certain people to be for me what I want them to be or what I think they should be, it's like this veil comes over and completely blocks out the sun of that higher compassion. I lose my moorings. I don't know where I should be now in this relationship because it's being driven by my cravings and desires, not for the universal call to bring light and peace and joy to all beings without favoritism, right? Without specialness. He says, when I'm in that place, I will feel pain. Now, he says, my thoughts, when I'm in this place, are all for them. Like my life gets consumed by the drama and the trauma of these relationships. I don't have time to put my thoughts on higher things, to release myself from these pigeonholed points of view. I'm stuck in trying to put out the fires or fix somebody else's problems, or I can't see beyond the immediacy of these body dynamics. And thus my life is frittered away. My family and friends all change and pass, for whom the changeless divine teaching is cast out. So in other words, everything is changing and passing away, and I'm putting all my worth and stock in these special relationship dynamics. And by doing that, as Jesus said, I'm making that worth more than the teachings that will bring all beings out of suffering, including myself. For if I act like childish beings, sure it is that I shall fall to evil destinies. So why do I keep company with infants who lead me to a state so far from virtue? Now, doesn't that sound judgmental? Doesn't that sound harsh? And yet it's coming from the same lips of one who lives to serve all beings and to liberate them. But you can't do that with a false mask. You can't do that from the ego. So when you're trying to be compassionate as the ego, you completely eclipse or shut yourself off from the higher wisdom. You're going on what you think is right, and you're making more suffering for yourself. And as we're going to see in a moment, you don't really change or fix anything with what beings are doing. They're doing what they're doing because these are the repetitive, habitual choices that they're making for themselves, right? He says, one moment friends, the next they're bitter enemies. Even pleasant things arouse their discontent. Ordinary people, it's hard to please them. So this is one of the things that we get clear on as we mature along the spiritual path. You can't really communicate your deeper understandings and awakening to someone who's still hell-bent on making drama and insisting that he or she is a victim of the world. That's the way they've set it up. They don't want this teaching because they don't want to take responsibility or feel the weight of the fact that they're producing or generating all of their own problems. And so when we lack wisdom and we get involved in trying to help or fix somebody who's just generating their own drama by choosing these suffering decisions, right? We forget that we now become embroiled and we can never fix or save them, and now we're suffering along with them. He says, a beneficial word, and they resent it, turning me instead from what is good. And when I close my ears to what they say, their anger makes them fall to lower states. So even if I try to inject a little wisdom into the relationship, they're not ready for it because they don't want the light. The light is the enemy. And so they resent me for saying something uplifting. And then when I, in a way, don't want to indulge their false belief, they feel like I'm insulting them. So these types of dynamics, if you're paying attention, will show up in many of our relationships. And keep in mind, there's hope here, of course, because if you're shifting and making these healthy and higher choices for yourself, and you begin to show up differently just in your being and presence in the relationship, things might tilt in favor of them wanting to move more into the sunlight. And you can grow together. In many ways, that's what this relationship was for. It triggered it. It encouraged you to make these higher choices for yourself because of the relationship, pain that you were feeling in the relationship. But if you find that you're making these higher and healthier choices for yourself and the relationship begins to break down and become even more volatile to the point where that person doesn't even want to know you or be a part of you, then you realize this was just, it served its function. Once I've made these choices and that person is no longer able to be in my life, that was because these choices were for the higher truth and they're not ready for it. He says when we keep company with people who have not the desire to wake up, all we can really do is talk about self-indulgence, judging others, criticizing. And then he says, and then we can talk about good things inside of the dream. It's all about talking about the dream. Every kind of vice is sure to come when we do this. And then he says finally here, therefore flee the company of childish people. Greet them when you meet them with smiles that keep on terms of common courtesy without inviting intimate relations. And he says, even the Buddhas could not satisfy the dependencies and the wants of these childish beings. He says, how could I if the Buddhas can't do that? So then finally he says, in kindness, childish beings take no delight unless their own desires are satisfied. A childish person thus is no true friend. This the Buddhas have declared. In other words, you can't be friends or really in a true relationship with somebody who's completely driven by selfishness. If it's only their desires that they want to see met, it doesn't matter if you're kind. It doesn't matter if you're generous today. What are you going to give me tomorrow? Like this kind of dynamic will oftentimes show itself in one way or another. So that even the Buddhas say, flee from those types of relationships. You really can't establish a true friendship with somebody who is so self-centered. They don't know what it means to be a friend. You treat them with love and kindness, smile, you're gracious, you're warm, but you don't allow them into your inner orbit. And you definitely don't get embroiled in their drama because they're looking for it. It's like if you've gone to the subway in New York City, it's like I remember when I lived there, it's like you could see who's scouting Who's looking for the mark? And they have like this sense of where the vulnerable, where the stupid, where the unconscious person is. And they go for them. We have that type of instinct if we're, selfish beings. And we'll find our marks. You just have to have the wisdom to know you're not a mark anymore. And remember what Jesus said. One of the ways that we get embroiled and pulled in is that we play the role of father, mother, son, daughter. You got to use that sword. You got to cut those cords of codependency, obligation, and guilt. It's all part of these dream relationships that end in nothing. They're really hallucinations, and in the end. And when you start waking up, when you see your world begin to quake and things are seemingly being taken away and relationships are breaking apart, know that it's just because you're actually going up in awareness and you're no longer going to stay within those circumscribed habitual roles. So there are three ways to really map this out, what I'm saying this morning, 3 levels. And the first level is, well, we should say it this way. Whenever we're coming from a dream perspective, in A Course in Miracles, it's referred to as coming from an upside down perspective or a fear-based perspective. And the fear-based perspective is, I am this body. So this is where we all start. Now he says in the Course, if we're in a place now where we start to recognize that these thoughts that come from our codependency, our selfishness, our need and craving for other bodies, that this is causing us pain. We begin to sort those out, and we begin to look at our thoughts very carefully, and we begin to let go of and no longer feed these unwholesome tendencies, these selfish tendencies, and so that our minds become more and more attuned to letting go of these thoughts that hurt. He says, if we're not doing that, we're trying to compromise. We're trying to walk this path of awakening, but stay in the world at the same time. Keep the relationships exactly as we've known them to be, but make compromises within these relationships. Not really accepting those hard truths and cutting the cords, but actually trying to adapt in these dysfunctional dynamics, still play the role. That won't last. He calls that stage the neurotic stage. We will be neurotic. We won't feel grounded. We won't feel settled. And we will never feel peace because we know what we're doing is disingenuine. And in fact, in the long run, it's a disservice to myself and the person I'm involved with. Right? It's inauthentic. The last stage is we maintain our point of view. We stay completely identified with our dream character, with our roles, with what we believe. It's rock solid, it's true, and I'm not going to change it for anybody. So any teaching that's going to come in to have me examine who I think I am and the suffering that's going on in my life as if it were coming from me, I'm going to reject that. I'm going to stay in my belief system, come hell or high water. And he actually calls that stage the psychotic stage, a psychosis, a split with reality, because we stay locked in place at the relative level. We don't want to budge, and we don't want to acknowledge that we're completely ignoring and blocking out the absolute level, right? And so we become imprisoned within these beliefs, and we won't change. He says, in that regard, it would take great pain to shake somebody from those psychotic beliefs. And that's usually what happens, right? So we've been talking over the past few weeks about freedom from concepts and how to get clear of these belief systems that keep us within these worn out patterns of false identity. And I think this will be helpful. This is from Chogyam Trungpa. And he's talking here about what we've mentioned many times, freedom from names and concepts. He says, there is not very much you can say about ultimate or absolute truth. It is freedom from fixation. And freedom from fixation means being free of names and concepts. But if you take out name and concept, what is left? There is the shadow of name and concept. But is that real? It is not real, but pure shadow. Is the name real or the concept real? You could give someone a name. You could decide to call your son George. Is he actually George? Maybe he is not George. He is George Smith. Is he actually Smith? That is just a name you decided to call him for lack of an alternative. You have to call him something. You have to put him in school, and you have to get him a passport if he's going to travel in foreign countries, and he should know who he is. So if somebody asks, "Who are you?" he can answer, "My name is George." Everybody has done that to us for generations and generations and generations. So we have begun to regard giving our children names as a very ordinary thing to do. But where did that come from? It came from all kinds of misunderstandings that took place over a long period of time, from the time we grunted and wore animal skins and carried stone weapons. From then onward, our human society developed. We began to be smart enough to call somebody George or Tim. My son George Smith is a concept. I am George Smith is a concept also. Where did that come from? How did we do that? We call this bread and we call that pot. So bread is always connected with something you can eat, and pot with something you can cook in. The concept of bread does not have any background as such. Do we actually have a real feeling of the word bread in our mind before we have been told that something is bread? But we never think about these things. We just think, I had bread. It has gone down and out to the sewage system by the time we think about it. So this is what these deeper teachings want us to do, is really look at who we think everybody is. We give them names, we give ourselves a name, and we're completely bewildered and beguiled by names, by concepts. We live in a mist of unexamined concepts, and we relate to them as if they really exist, all the while in a state of sleep, stupor, and ignorance. And then we wonder why we're bumping into things and getting hurt by other things, because we're completely out of our sorts when it comes to knowing magnetic north, having direction, not being lost. We're lost in the mist of false thinking. Are you your name? Are you your story? Look at how much worth and value we've put into these things. It's all we live for. It's what we live as. Completely unexamined. What if you're not Bill? Bill is just a name. Who are you? Who calls himself Bill? When we find this out, we transition from the relative to the brighter sphere of the absolute, where we know who we are. If we don't know who we are, and we're just living by these names, concepts, and stories, how can we relate to anyone, truly? How can our relationships have any deep, genuine meaning or value if we're living in shadows? So this is part of this major turning about in our heart. This is what the Buddhist will call the awakening of bodhicitta, this part of the mind that's already illuminated. The one listening right now, if you're getting the light, that little bit of light of self-examination, wait a minute, I really have been hypnotized by my name and my story. Everything I think is referred back to my story of me and my past learning and who I think I am. But that part of the mind that starts to question, am I my name? Am I my story? Am I my body? That begins to flicker with the higher light. And if you cultivate that, if you protect that, if you nourish that, if you come to class on Monday nights or Thursdays, or sign up for other classes, whatever classes, mine or somebody else's, if you're nurturing that light, it will get brighter. And you'll be able to see more. You'll be able to see through the mists of the ego. And that's why that's an important element in the Buddhist teachings. You calm down, shamatha, you cultivate this light of insight. I'm not my name. I'm not my story. Nobody is their name or their story. Everybody's the absolute self appearing in a mirage of forms. Right? That's the truth of it. And the awakening of insight begins to have you see what they call the egolessness of self and the egolessness of things or bodies or objects. You begin to see through the mists. Now you know my son, my wife, my partner. That's a mist through which you can now see the Buddha nature. That's why you'll never show up the same in a relationship with dysfunctional, guilt-ridden dynamics again. Because you would be showing up as a mist, and you'd be relating to a mist, a false self, relating to a false self. Right? So this is why we question our concepts. This is why we begin to sit and really examine what we think and what we believe. And it results in seeing that a lot of what we believe is out of focus, distorted, or entirely wrong. Right? And that's good news, because as you give up these false beliefs, the light can come in. Now finally here, so he says in the Course, as we already related, every aspect of fear, right? And fear means any constricted emotion, any disturbing experience, any upset, any anxiety. This is all fear. Every aspect of fear proceeds from upside down perception. I am this body. I'm not in the realm of absolute truth. I don't have Buddha nature. I'm not generating my dream world. I'm a product of my dream world, right? That's the fear-prone condition. So every aspect of fear is coming from this belief. I don't generate my reality. I'm the effect of this reality. And then he says this. He says, since the miracle aims at restoring sanity to your awareness, it would hardly be useful if it were bound by the laws of the same error it aimed to correct. So in other words, the light's going to come in when you're ready and you ask for it. When it comes in, it doesn't obey the laws of your dream. It doesn't operate with the same limitations. So it overrides them. So it brings the impossible, I should say it this way, it brings the possibility of release from an impossible situation. That's what the miracle does. It gives you a door where you never thought there would be a door. It gives you a way of escape where you thought you were completely doomed. Because it overrides the dream. He says only human beings make this kind of error that the higher order reality can't override their current life experience. Because we think we know. We think we understand how everything works. But there's a higher order reality that will completely undo what we believe if we're open to it. If we put more worth to it, right? Whatever you value becomes real to you. Think of it this way. Whatever you love, you make real. That's why he's saying, if you don't love me more than mother, father, brother, sister, daughter, you're not worthy of this. Why? Because you're putting your worth in the dream. And you will see fear, and you won't get out of it, because what you're putting your value in keeps you in it. He says only human beings make this kind of error. It is an expression of the foolish consistency their own false beliefs have engendered. And he's pointing out here that our little minds tend to devise solutions that work within the laws of the problems they are designed to correct. Only solutions, in other words, tend to be foolishly consistent with the problem, which we've talked about. Can never solve the problem at the level in which it's occurring. Right? So the miracle opens up a way of thinking and seeing the problem from a completely different level. We don't know how that happens, but we must make it our desire. We must value its coming, and it will come. That's why he says in the very next line, both the power and the strength of your creative will must be understood before the real meaning of denial can be appreciated and abolished. So remember, reality is being generated from me by my will. I'm a magician, right? Abara kadabara, which is Hebrew. I will create. Abara, ke as dabara, I speak. And I'm speaking in my thoughts first. My words follow my thoughts. I create as I speak. So, you're creating your world as you think. And so what he's saying then is that the strength of your will is creative. And then he goes further and he says this, we're using our will to deny the absolute truth and stay asleep within the relative truth. Then he says, don't think that denying the absolute truth is just, God is absent from your awareness. He says denial is not mere negation. It's positive miscreation. So not only do I deny my true self, but now I'm making suffering through my will. And what's really crazy, I've thought about this. Do you know that there's a fungus in nature that attacks ants? The spores get into the ant's nervous system, and it completely hijacks the nervous system of the ant. And the ant begins to follow the dictates of the fungus, and it makes the ant climb up to this stalk high up in the forest, use its mandibles to latch on to the stalk, and then the fungus grows out of the ant's head and releases its spores so that it can breed more. And this is a perfect archetypal expression of the ego's thought system. It hijacks our thought system, and it has us replicating it. And so we actually think we're getting what we want, and it's enticing and it's desirable And we're completely caught in the spell of staying at the relative level, trying to fix our problems and get our pleasure. And meanwhile, we're infected. And we don't even know it because we're numbed, we're entertained, we're enticed, we're embroiled. And meanwhile, all we're doing is strengthening the ego thought system, using our creative will to positively miscreate and literally do the ego's bidding, manufacturing more ego environment and experiences. So he says, don't underestimate the power of your will. And he says, while the miscreation is necessarily believed in by its own maker, it does not exist at all at the level of creation. So we totally believe our life is real down here at the relative level. Of course we do. That's why we keep miscreating it. We insist it's real. It's worth something. It's worth more than he. Me, not he. Right? And that's the ego talking. The ego is the me, absent from the he. And we're literally infected with that fungus. That's what we think we are. It's talking, its voice, and we think that's us. That's the fungus. Isn't that a great illustration? It's the fungus talking as you, telling you what you want, telling you who your role is. You're infected, my friend, and don't even know it. That's why these teachings confront, and then we can do something about it. We can then begin to sort it out, and that's what he says. The miracle compares what you make with the higher level of creation, accepting what is in accord as true and rejecting the discordant as false. So you begin to do an assessment, and you see everything that comes from you that's truly loving, non-selfish, and helpful is something that will come from the God part of you. Everything that's, codependent and inferior or superior or whatever, the distortion, that's coming from the ego part of you. And so you sort these things out. And he says all aspects of fear, that is body identity, are untrue because they do not exist at the higher creative level and therefore do not exist at all. Now here's the rub, and I'll end with this. To whatever extent you are willing to submit your beliefs to the real test of validity, to that extent your perceptions will be healed. So in other words, we go through these parts of our mind believing what we've been believing and going, well, does this resonate with the higher truth of who I am? Or is it in discord with the higher truth of who we really all are? And if it's out of alignment, I don't want to keep feeding it. I don't want to strengthen it. And I don't want to encourage that in other people by strengthening their misperceptions or going along with their misperceptions. That's a disservice. Give me 2 minutes. So he says, this is how we practice. We watch our thoughts, appealing silently to him who sees the elements of truth in each of our thoughts. Let him evaluate all thoughts that come to mind. Remove the elements of dreams and give them back to you as clean ideas which do not contradict the will of God. Give him your thoughts, and he will give them back as miracles, which joyously proclaim the wholeness and the happiness of who you really are. And they are proof that you are loved. And as each thought is thus transformed, it takes on healing power from the mind, which saw the truth in it and failed to be deceived by what was falsely added. All the threads of fantasy are taken out of your thoughts. And what remains is unified into a perfect thought that offers its perfection everywhere. Okay? So then we see our true family. Then we can truly relate to one another. Okay. Let's take a moment. Blue bag or basket or hat or whatever we got. Singing bowl. We'll go around. If you're joining on YouTube or Facebook, remember you can click the link below in the comments section and help support the 8 a.m. service. We offer thanks for the offering, and we intend that this offering be used to bring all beings to true happiness and true freedom. And so it is. Amen. All right, my friends, let's seal the deal. Resting within the stillness of the heart, we know that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Have a beautiful day. See many of you tomorrow night.